So it's my great privilege to introduce the president of the American Finance Association, Luigi Zingales, who will be delivering this year's presidential address. Luigi is well known to you, and of course I hardly have to introduce him. He's perhaps best known to the finance research community for his important contributions in corporate finance, but his reach has been far broader than that. Luigi belongs to a very small group of scholars who have excelled both as theorists and empiricists. Given his many contributions, very diverse contributions, I'm of course hard put to organize them under one overarching theme, but let me still give it a try. Piggybacking off the classic book by Karl Popper, I'm tempted to suggest the following title for the opus that would cover all of Luigi's work: The Open Economy and Its Enemies. Indeed, a core thesis in much of Luigi's work is that an open economy fosters financial development, which in turn advances economic growth and prosperity. Two celebrated articles with Raghu Rajan, Financial Development and Growth, published in 1998, and The Great Reversals, published in 2003, together with an influential book, Saving Capitalism from the Capitalists, published in 2003, form the main body of this work. Now, in Financial Development and Growth, Rajan and Zingales suggest a novel approach to settling the perennial question of causality between financial development and economic growth. To identify the effects of external financial constraints on investment and growth, they look at differences in external financial needs across industries. They posit that these differences are stable over time and across nations. They predict that financial development, which has the effect of reducing external financial costs, ought to have a bigger effect on industries that are more dependent on external financing, and they find strong supporting evidence. But then this raises the question of what causes financial development. This is largely the question addressed in the Great Reversals article and in the Saving Capitalism from the Capitalists book. The Great Reversals article not only found a major gap in the legal origins hypothesis of financial development, but also points to the first elements that Luigi later developed on how opening up of economies can foster financial development, and how the biggest risk for financial development is the emergence of incumbent interest groups that will use the political system to close the economy and thus preserve their rents. Much of Luigi's research can be tied directly to this basic theme and analysis. His influential article with Steve Kaplan on how to measure a firm's financial constraints gives complementary microeconomic analysis to the financial dependence and growth article. His articles on corporate governance, private benefits of control, with Alexander Dyke and other co-authors, address the question of what empowers the enemies of the open economy, and focus on different mechanisms that can constrain the exercise of power by corporate insiders, whether it's the media, whistleblowers, or tax authorities. At the risk of stretching the overarching theme, his theory of the firm with Raghu Rajan, which emphasizes the power of access to essential assets and the role of dedicated hierarchies in protecting firm-specific human capital, is concerned with the institutional underpinnings of a well-functioning open economy. Finally, his more recent work on culture and economic financial development with Luigi Guiso and Paola Sapienza explores which cultural factors foster thriftiness and the trust necessary to engage in economic and financial transactions in an open economy. This work is important, if only for rigorously showing how cultural factors which have been neglected by economists can be as significant as economic and institutional factors in explaining financial development. Culture itself can be an enemy of an open economy if it fosters distrust and undermines the creation of social capital. Let me finish on a more personal note and say what I find remarkable about Luigi, and that is his willingness to fight the enemies of the open economy on other battlegrounds than academia. He has been willing to spend his tremendous energy and powers of persuasion engaging the public at large and Italian politicians. I've had the good fortune to hear him speak on a few occasions, and I'm always looking forward to one of his talks. A particularly appealing side of Luigi is his taste for talking straight and his willingness to take on a controversial topic. But what's remarkable is that I've never seen him get carried away. The scholar inside him holds back so that in the end he never seems to cross the line and make a truly controversial statement. Please welcome the current president of the AFA, Luigi Zingales.
Patrick, thank you very much for these kind words. I hope I will not violate your rule as of today. So I think I'm very honored to be here today, and there are, of course, a lot of people that I would like to thank, starting with my parents, my wife, and the fantastic co-authors that I had all along. I think that one of the privileges of this profession is that you can pick who you work with, which is, in the real world, very uncommon. And I was blessed with more than my fair share of not only fantastic economists, but fantastic human beings from whom I learned a lot in the process. So I think that those are my big thanks. But also, I would like to thank the member of the American Finance Association, the one actually who paid the dues and voted for me, because I have to say I was never an easy member, as Patrick sort of reminded us. I have been more than my fair share of criticism, etc. And the fact of being here today as president of this association makes me very proud. Very proud because I not only recognize the human capital in this room, which is impressive, but also recognize the values of this organization. Yesterday, we were discussing how to make this organization more open, more transparent, more fair. And I'm very actually proud of saying that this organization is so fair that 4 weeks ago, my paper was rejected at the Journal of Finance. And unlike many of you, I think my paper was really good and deserved to be published. But I decided that this was actually a tribute to the organization, of course, to Ken Silgerton, and but to no, seriously, I mean it in a serious way, because this shows that we don't do favoritism, and I think that this is what is most important in my view. And I have actually a privilege, thanks to your support, the privilege of addressing you and actually getting one paper in, for sure. And I decided that I don't want to waste this opportunity with a normal paper. And this is if I wrote a normal paper and was really good, I could have published it anyway. And if it's not really good, why should I impose it on you and impose it on the Journal of Finance? So I decided that I want to take this opportunity as to do really a address to the profession, trying to challenge ourselves a bit. And I will start actually with a question that you say, what is so challenging of this question is sort of pretty obvious. Does finance benefit society? And I think most people in this room would say, yes, of course, and will cite a lot of papers, maybe even some of my own. And I think we're very comfortable with that. The problem is that society at large does not seem to agree with that. So let's start with the economist readers, not exactly some bunch of commies, and confronted with the question of financial innovation boost economic growth, 57% voted no. Now you say, okay, it was 2010, people were still sort of affected by the crisis, maybe Joe Stiglitz, who made the case against finance, was very successful, so this is not something we should worry about, and as sort of a recovery eventually will come back, people will have forgotten that. Now, Not so fast, because if we look at the trust toward the banking sector, for example, these are Gallup data, in all the countries that face a crisis went down significantly, much more than trust in institutions in general, and has not recovered since. And more importantly, through the Financial Trust Index survey, we ask a question about overall, and this is a question asked to actually real people, average sample 1,000 people who represent average Americans. And confronted with the question overall, how much, if at all, do you think that the US financial system benefits or hurts the US economy? You have 48% that say it doesn't, it hurts. And only 34% that say that it benefits. There are 22% that say it hurts a great deal. Only 9% that say it benefits a great deal. So there is a disconnect, and I'm sure many of you will say, why should we care? After all, we don't care about survey polls to determine whether a homework is correct or not. We know what is the right answer, and we don't take polls to decide what is right or wrong. So why should we in this particular case? And my first thing is that every business suffers greatly from a negative public image. In fact, ironically, I learned this 20 years ago when Michael Milken came and visited Chicago, and he knew firsthand what it costs to have a negative public image. You can pretty quickly go out of business in one way or another. Now, of all businesses, finance is particularly exposed to the political interference. Why? Because it's very easy to interfere with finance, generally is very highly concentrated, so there are lots of people who benefit and very few who loses. So from a political point of view, if there is a populist sort of outrage, I think interfering in the financial world is relatively easy and attractive. But what I want to say even more is the one that tends to suffer the most is the kind of finance that I, and hopefully we, care the most, which is the competitively market-based finance. This is the one, as I will explain in a second, that finds it very difficult to operate if you don't have the expectation of the rule of law, not only the existing rule of law, but the expectation of the rule of law. And unfortunately, there is a very serious vicious circle that can play that start with you have some populist outrage that might start to challenge the rule of law. Once the rule of law is challenged, then the only way in which financiers can operate is by have political support, by becoming friend with the government, by lobbying and paying and being in bed with the government. And of course, this is not feasible for everybody. In fact, it's most feasible for the worst part of finance, the one who are earning a rent, so they have enough of the money to spend in lobbying the government. So only the non-competitive part or less competitive part succeed in doing that, making to some extent the system more corrupt, and by making more corrupt, by creating a stronger populist outrage that will, of course, will start feeding from the beginning of a challenge in the rule of law. Now, you're saying this doesn't happen, at least doesn't happen in the United States, but it did happen quite a bit in the Great Depression. It did happen, and it does happen around the world. Dittel and McCulloch in Latin America show that within a country, the more you perceive there is corruption, the more you want government to intervene. Now, this sounds completely against our intuition, but that's what people actually react. And following an increase in corruption, you have an increase in vote for populist parties. And I have to say, even in the United States, after the financial crisis, we have seen this rising. I don't know how many of you remember that in 2009, US Congress voted by a wide margin a 90% retroactive tax on bank bonuses. Now, the Senate knew better than to confirm it, but the House voted with a wide margin something that was completely against Constitution and the protection of property rights. So in the face of populist outrage, I think it's very difficult to resist. Now, given that hopefully I convince you how important this is, remains to decide who to blame. In a sense, it could be the public who doesn't understand, or maybe us that don't understand too much or we're too enamored of what we do. And what I learned when I wrote a paper with Paula on the difference of opinion between average American and economists is that economists seems to agree the most on issues that are most distant from ordinary human beings. And the irony is that if you look carefully, it seems that the ordinary human being seems to be more thoughtful than economists in answering those questions. So I think that I am worried that maybe it's not only them who make a mistake, but also us. So I think that we collectively are responsible to closing this gap, in part by explaining and documenting the benefits of what we're doing, and I think we're doing quite a good job in that dimension, but of course more can be done. But the second, I think that maybe it's time for a little bit of introspection and say, where does this confidence that all finance is good? Now, if I say, does finance benefit society? I think that as economists, we tend to think, oh, does an epsilon of finance maybe benefit society? The answer is, of course, yes. That's the narrow way to interpret the question. But most human beings, when they look at the question, they think, does all finance benefit society? And maybe not. This is a picture by Greenwood and Shafstein showing the dramatic rise in the financial sector in the United States. In a matter of 40 years, went from roughly 4% of GDP to more than 9% of GDP, with credit intermediation and securities trading being the biggest chunk of it. And so my question is, can we confidently say, without any doubt, that all this has been good, or that most of it has been good? Can we argue from theory? Can we argue from evidence? Can we argue by analogy with other sectors? So let me start from theory. When we think about any market, the market for, let's say, entertainment, as economists, we don't really worry there is too much of it or too little of it. We know that there is a thing called the first welfare theorem that says in a competitive economy, the competitive equilibrium is Pareto efficient. You can't do better without making somebody worse off. Unfortunately, this doesn't apply in financial markets when markets are incomplete. And I think we all agree that we don't have every market for every security at every possible state of the world. Now, maybe we think it's an approximation. However, we know from actually Oliver Hardy's dissertation that you can easily build counterexample in which introducing a new market makes everybody worse off. And actually subsequent work shown that this is not even that rare. In fact, it's a generic result. So I'm not saying that overall finance is not good. I'm just saying that our reliance on saying comes from theory. There is no theoretical basis for the presumption that all financial innovation, by expanding financial opportunity, increases welfare. There's no presumption of the opposite either, but there is no presumption that that's the case. Okay, so what for theory? Let's look at empirical evidence. And clearly there's been a lot of it. And even severe critics of finance, like Stiglitz, agree on two things. Number one, a good financial system is essential for a well-functioning economy. That's good, and I think that we all agree on that. And two, that there is plenty of evidence throughout history that finance help promote growth. So if everybody agrees on that, or most people agree on that, so what is the matter of contention? I think the matter of contention is whether the innovation of the last 40 years has been good on average, and two, whether today we can say confidently that the size of the US financial system is not excessive. And what kind of evidence do we have of that? Of course, there is the gigantic literature on finance and growth that has been very well summarized by Levine in a series of articles. But much of this evidence, of course, talks about average, not marginal. So the fact that some finance is good does not mean that all finance is good. And in fact, surprisingly, after the financial crisis, we start to see papers that shows that on the margin, an increase in, for example, intermediation, credit over GDP, is bad, not good for growth. Now, it's not a definite proof, but makes us reflect, especially because once we start looking at the dynamic aspect, now we know that big rise in credit to GDP tend to be associated with crisis afterward. And the work by Atif and Amir suggests that in terms of debt to GDP. If we go to more financially sophisticated instruments like equity market and derivatives, the evidence becomes surprisingly slim. So there is one paper by Levine and Zervos showing that there is a correlation between the turnover in the equity market and growth. But Levine and Zervos are very clear. They search for a number of measures to find the one that actually was correlated. And this is not the most obvious measure of development that we can think of. And when you go in the direction of more sophisticated markets, maybe I've now done the literature search good enough, but I'm happy to be proven wrong, and I recommend you to send me all the papers that I've missed. I did not find much of an evidence that they add to, for example, economic growth, which is not to say they're not useful at all, and this is not what I want to say, but if I'm an empiricist and I look at the evidence is less than overwhelming. And it's particularly less than overwhelming if you use the old principle of Sherlock Holmes, of the dog that did not bark. Why I want to use this principle? Because I think about the incentives to produce papers. And once data are available, and a question is interesting, a lot of us trying to write a paper. And if the paper is not there, it's probably because the result is not there. So when data are available, I think the lack of published evidence can be safely interpreted as evidence of lack of an effect, because certainly people did not lack trying. So what about analogy? Somebody suggested, wait a minute, the healthcare sector grew even more during this period. Why should we be concerned about the financial sector? The healthcare sector grew even faster. In fact, it's interesting because there are a lot of points in common between the doctor services and the financial services. At the very minimum, everybody needs some, and nobody understands anything. At least I don't understand anything of medicine, so I suspect that doctors don't understand much of finance. And they are plagued with conflict of interest. There are clearly examples of abuse and fraud all over the place. And recently, Gennaioli et al. Actually have made a clear comparison and said finance is a service, like medical service, and while this is expensive, it beats the alternative. If you don't go to the doctor, it's very dangerous for you, and if you don't go to a financial service, that's dangerous for you. And actually, a paper that is forthcoming in the Journal of Finance shows exactly that if you get some financial advice, you do better than if you don't, which sort of, again, beats the alternative. Maybe it's not such a high achievement, but it beats the alternative. However, is healthcare really a positive analogy for us? The question is not whether we benefit from doctors. We hope we do. The issue we're interested as economists is a cost-to-benefit ratio. And it's actually pretty scary that the US healthcare expenditure is twice as big over GDP than most developed nations like UK, Sweden, and so on and so forth. And the United States have fairly little to show off for this. In fact, if you look at the life expectancy of Americans, US ranks only 32nd in developed countries, below Portugal and Greece. in spite of the fact that we spend 4 times as much as Portugal and Greece. Now, of course, there are a lot of other factors. In Greece and Portugal, you learn to drink good wine before you learn to shoot. That helps. And second, you have good olive oil, so maybe that's what makes the difference. What is most remarkable is, this is not something I produce, I found, but I found very interesting, and I would like at some point some of you to produce something similar for finance. This is, on one axis, there is the health expenditure per capita, and on the y-axis, there is life expectancy. Each point is a year. And so what you see is health expenditure has gone up in all developed countries, and this increase mapped into an increase in life expectancy, but the ratio of this increase is dramatically below for the United States than for the rest of the countries. So to me, this picture is saying we in the United States spend poorly in healthcare. So I don't want to take healthcare as an example, because example of bad behavior, not good behavior. And the question we should ask ourselves is, in Sweden, the share of finance over GDP is half of the US ones. Are retirement savings, for example, of the Swedes managed so much worse than the one of the United States? I think the answer is probably not, and we have a paper suggesting that that's not the case. So if we really cannot come up with a compelling reason for such an explosion of finance, maybe, and I think with some sort of disappointment, but maybe we need to think about alternative. We need to entertain alternative. And maybe there is some possibility of rent-seeking in finance. Activities that are profitable, otherwise people will not engage in them, but they're not particularly useful for society overall. And I would like, and depending on, yes, I would like to discuss some of those, probably not all of those, because there are cocktails out there, and I want to make sure that you drink. But I think it's important to think about those and how important they are in the current US financial system, and not just US, but also US. So what I would like to do is discuss not so much duping investors, because this is, I think, well known. I would like to discuss a bit of aiding and abetting agency problems, in the sense a lot of financial products are designed to be sold to agents and designed to make them appealing to the agents, but not particularly appealing to the principal. And of course, in a rational world, principals will try to limit it contractually, and however, their success depends on the speed of innovation, the flexibility of technology, and how present and active the principal is. And unfortunately, I think finance stands out in all 3 dimensions. And we have examples, and I think there are recent papers, especially by Valet, showing how people design products that are, for example, sold to politicians, to local politicians in France. Why? Because they want to cover up their problem of budget, and surprise, surprise, the financiers are able to build stuff that reduce the deficit to the extent that is convenient for the politician. And I'm sorry to say that we have seen that with Greece entering in the euro area, how much finance was useful in tricking the books. And we don't know about the other countries because they had not asked for the bailout yet, and so we don't know all the facts. But this is pervasive and is a source of worry. As a source of worry, the amount of fraud that we observe in the financial sector. I think there are some estimates. I think that the most important thing is to look at the amount of fines that the financial sector paid in the last 2 years. 139 billion. And a whistleblower inside JP Morgan said that 40% of the mortgages of some issues of IMBS were based on overstated incomes. And this is a picture from Piskowski et al. That shows what fraction of the mortgages issued by various companies had misrepresented, if I remember correctly, status and whether it was a second home or not. And this is a gigantic number and is something that we need to care about. And what I am particularly shocked, I have to say, what I call is the banality of fraud. Not only people commit fraud, but they commit it without even being upset about it. It's just normal. Look at this exchange of email of the Royal Bank of Scotland. These are some traders that are fixing, I think it was the LIBOR, and they talk to each other like, oh, I do a little bit more than yesterday, but I'm gonna be very thankful to you, and etc. This is like a normal conversation, in spite of the fact that they knew they were logged, so this was normal. There is no attempt to hide, no sense of guilt. It's ordinary business. And of course, we have also the distortion created by the government, and those are well too known for me to spend time here. But what I want to say, because very often this is misunderstood, many of these distortions are not the result of populist pressure. These are a result of financial industry pressure that benefit tremendously from this distortion, creating more scope for the financial sector. So the consequences, in my view, looks very much what Shea and Moretti show for the real estate. The real estate sector is not really perfect competition, at least there used to be perfect competition because of the MLS system. If you have a system with high margins and free entry, what you have is too much entry. And I think that this seems to be what happens in finance. If you have a sector where you can dupe investor pretty easily and there is free entry, you're going to have too many people doing that. And this is really, in my view, the biggest cost. It's not so much the fact that some people got duped, is sad, but it's not the end of the world. What is really sad is the fact that people specialize in and compete in how can I dupe better, how can I make instruments that bypass regulation better, how can I maximize the put option provided by the US government, and so on and so forth. I think this is not a great activity. Now, the typical response when you see this is more government regulation. Unfortunately, government regulation is often the problem, not the solution. So what I do want to do today is not discuss what other people can do, but what we can do. And what we can do in our empirical research, in our theoretical research, in our teaching to try to change the state of affairs. So the first one is really use the research to act as whistleblowers of what does not work. And in this respect, there are remarkable examples in this profession I'm very proud of. And each one of these examples has been harassed, has been risked being sued, has fought a difficult battle to publish papers that were instrumental to make finance better, to make society better. And so I want to thank these people for having done that, but I also want to raise the issue that there is not enough. Just there are only 2 papers on mortgage fraud. That's not enough. Now, why is it so difficult to write these papers? Very often because data are proprietary, and of course, not only businesses don't want to share them, but also regulatory agencies don't want to share them. Or if they do share them, they share them with some fringe attached. If you reach the right results, you can publish. If you don't reach the right result, you can't publish. Now, they don't exactly put it this way. Patrick is right that I'm more straightforward than most people, but that's the substance of the provision that are there. And as a result, surprise, surprise, people only find the good results because they know that if they find the bad results, they wasted a year of their life. And I think that as association, we should be concerned about publishing paper from organizations that screen their outcome before reaches our desks. The second function that we can play in our empirical research is doing really an ex post analysis of cost and benefits of new financial instruments. Some people have proposed to have an FDA of financial innovation. I think is a crazy idea because, number one, the FDA does not work very well, so I don't know why to imitate something that does not work well. Second, I think it's very difficult to understand through control experiments the outcome of some financial instruments. But what we can do is to look more carefully at what is good and what is bad. And in that respect, in the payday loan business, I think that we had phenomenal research looking at both the positives and the negatives. We found that, if you don't have payday loans, the alternative might be worse. On the other hand, we know that access to payday loans put people in a spiral of increasing indebtedness that lead them to cut expenses for medical and other stuff. So I don't think that that's necessarily what we want. Now, one interesting result that was being found is that in Colorado, they had a good idea. Not only they liberalized drugs in Colorado, but they also a good idea on the payday loans. And what they say is we want to put some caps on rates, but we force to have loans not in the form of normal loans, but in form of installment loans, so that are easier for people to repay. And what they found is that after 3 years of this, borrowers pay much less, but, this is the interesting part, they receive more access to credit. Now, you say, this seems to defy gravity. How could you possibly have a business that becomes less profitable, because whatever one guy pays, the other guy gains, and at the same time, you have bigger supply of it? The answer actually has to do in the problem I was mentioning before, too much entry. So the issue here is people don't really realize when they're desperate how bad the contract they offer is. And so they take it when, if they offer a better contract like an installment loan, they are better able to pay it. If they are offered the straight payday loan, which by the way has a 400% interest over a period of annual interest over a period of a month, and is due in full at the end of that month, then people start to borrow more and more and get into the spiral. So because this business is so profitable on an individual basis, there is so much entry that you know that there are more payday loans today, payday loan stores, than Starbucks and McDonald's stores combined. Okay, so this is the excess entry. And of course, somebody has to pay the cost of all this infrastructure, and the cost is in higher rates. So ironically, with some targeted policy, you can get both sort of better rates for borrowers and more supply of loans. Now, what can we do in theoretical research? Now, we know from Thomas Kuhn that all researchers are affected by fads, ideology, and sometimes even interest. And I'm sorry to report that we economists are not different. We're like every other researcher. However, I think we have one advantage that sometimes we don't really use that much, which is we have a framework of analysis which is more rigorous than other, at least social sciences. And I think it's important to apply this advantage in a policy analysis, but with 3 caveats, and I will go fast because I want to get to the drinks. But these 3 caveats you can read. By the way, the paper is now posted on my webpage, so you can read it. So one is, when you do theoretical analysis, don't try to be policy relevant. If you really want to be policy relevant, write empirical papers. When you do theoretical analysis, be rigorous. Because if you try to be policy relevant, what you end up doing is reverse engineering the answer, and this is completely useless research. On the other hand, the good theoretical research is what forces you to think more sort of out of the box, to force a change in thinking. The second is policy is very different than politics. And both are very valuable, but when you do policy analysis, I don't think it's fair to incorporate the lobbying constraint. If you are advising the president, then these lobbying constraints are extremely important. But when you do policy analysis in academia, the lobbying constraints are the stuff you want to eliminate, not the stuff you want to impose to get the answer that is more politically pleasing. And the last one is sort of very easy, is keep it simple, stupid. Very often we like, as economists, to have elaborate solutions because that shows we're smart. But simple solutions are the ones that are easier to monitor, more difficult to arbitrage, and less easy to, if you want, corrupt through a lot of lobbying in phase of regulation and implementation. And I think I have in the paper some examples, but I will skip them in the interest of time. Now, one last thing that I care very deeply, which is teaching. As I said, one thing that I'm worried about is the moral standard in the financial world seems to be very low. Now, this could be just selection, or could be that our teaching has something to do with it. Now, there are two papers that seem to suggest that teaching of economics has something to do with it. In particular, there is a recent paper by Cohen et al. That came out this year on Nature, where they take bank employees and they do some experiment making salient their professional identity. And the more you make them feel like they are bankers, the more they behave dishonestly. The more you make them feel differently, like they are postal workers, the less you make them feel dishonest. Now you say, maybe it has something to do with the word banker, but they've tried with people who are not bankers, and it doesn't work. So if you make bankers salient to a non-banker, it does not behave more dishonestly. So the question that we should all ask ourselves is, are we training people to be more dishonest, or put it more politely, less honest? And our defense is, we just teach positive analysis, right? And part of this positive analysis is a crime is committed when the expected benefit is bigger than the expected cost. After all, this is Becker, 1968. And very often we label irrational somebody who does not commit a crime under this condition. Now, most people call such a person moral or decent. We call them irrational. So my question is, are we, by being agnostic, are we subtly and inadvertently teaching students to be the most amoral they can be without taking any responsibility? So the question is, maybe we should bring social norm into our regular MBA classes, not separate classes on sort of ethics, because those classes are like the religion classes in Italy when I grew up. You sort of hate them, and they make you agnostic like I become. Those are not useful at all. What you should bring them inside the regular business classes of finance and explain what we think is acceptable social norm and what you think is not. And we might disagree on that, but just, I think, discussing them will be useful, because we run the risk to undermine the very institution that we love, which is the marketplace. So concluding, so you can drink, I think that I strongly believe that a good financial system is essential to the prosperity and freedom. However, creating and sustaining such a system is not easy and does require broad public support. And unfortunately, this support is eroding even in the United States, and it's not that easy to regain. And we have something to do with it. As finance academic, we can make a difference, and I think we should make a difference. And not just because of our reputation, but because of our future. If you're not convinced by sort of the high ground, you will be convinced by self-interest. If finance becomes a business of political relationship, our techniques, our teaching is completely useless. In chronic countries, you don't go to business school, you go to intermingle with the powerful people. And so if we want to have a future as a teacher and researcher in finance, we have to take this challenge altogether. And I'm sure you disagree with many points I said, but I hope you agree with the importance of this matter and hopefully with some solution. Thank you.
Thank you, Luigi, for this tremendous presidential address. You raised many important points, many things we need to think about, and it shows all the service you have brought to our profession. And on behalf of the AFA, I would like to give you this plaque to thank you for everything you've done in your research and to serve.
Thank you.
Serve us. Thank you. And given that you are president of the AFA, you will automatically become a member of the Society of Fellows. And in honor of that, I will also give you the...
What is this? Oh, a fantastic crystal, not ball, because we don't have the crystal ball, but it's a crystal. Thank you.
Fantastic. That was great.